My name is Robert, and I turned 64 this spring. For most of my adult life, I worked as an operations manager at a mid-sized manufacturing company. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. I was the one who made sure things ran smoothly, who stayed late when shipments were delayed, who got the phone calls at 2 a.m. when a machine broke down. For 41 years, that building was as familiar to me as my own living room. I missed birthdays, vacations, and even a few holidays because I believed that providing for my family meant sacrifices, and I made them without a second thought. My wife, Margaret, used to tell me that one day I'd look back and regret not being more present, but I thought the payoff would be worth it. I thought they'd understand someday. The truth is, I always pictured retirement as something gentle, almost cinematic. I imagined sitting on the porch with Margaret, maybe traveling a little, watching my grandkids grow up. I thought there would be a celebration, but one filled with warmth, a recognition of the years I gave, the hours I traded for stability, and the countless times I put others before myself. What I didn't expect was the hollow joke of my own retirement party. It started as a company event, but my family insisted on joining in. "We'll make it extra special," my son Andrew had said. He's 34 now, sharp, ambitious, and always eager to be the center of attention. He inherited Margaret's quick wit, though somewhere along the way it turned mean-spirited. My daughter Claire, younger by 3 years, is quieter, more reserved. She and I used to have a close bond, but distance grew when she moved out west, chasing her own life. She still called, still tried in her own way, but it always felt like Andrew's shadow loomed larger at every family gathering. The night of the party, the conference room was packed. Balloons, streamers, and those cheap plastic congratulations banners covered the walls. Co-workers I'd trained decades ago clapped me on the back, congratulating me on making it to the finish line. There were speeches, some kind, some rushed, but the moment that seared itself into my memory came when they wheeled out the cake. It was a large sheet cake, frosted in white, with bright blue lettering piped across the top. And there it was, written for everyone to see. Finally useless. The words sank into me like a stone. The room erupted in laughter. A chorus of chuckles, claps, and even a few whistles filled the air. I tried to play along, because what else could I do? My son was front and center, phone in hand, recording it all with a grin stretched across his face. "Dad, it's perfect," he shouted, as if mocking my life's work was some kind of clever punchline. Margaret laughed too, hesitant at first, but then joining in, swept up in the wave. I caught Claire's eyes for a split second. She wasn't laughing. She looked down at her plate, fiddling with her fork. I smiled for the photos. I posed, knife in hand, pretending to cut the cake like it was all one big joke. Inside, though, something shifted. It wasn't just the cake. It was the culmination of years of quiet dismissals, of sacrifices that went unseen, of being the steady background character in my own family's story. After the speeches, I picked up the tab for the restaurant portion. Naturally, Andrew raised a toast, clinking his glass against his new Rolex, a purchase he hadn't stopped bragging about since the day he got it. "To Dad," he said, smirking. "May he enjoy being finally useless." Laughter roared again, and I swallowed it down with the bitter taste of my drink. When the night ended, they all filed out, patting me on the back, thanking me for dinner, promising to call soon. I drove home alone. Margaret had decided to ride with Andrew, saying she wanted to help him with something important. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a flood of photos being tagged on social media. Smiling faces, clinking glasses, me in the background holding that ridiculous cake. I sat in the driveway for a long time, staring at the dark windows of my house. 41 years, and this was the send-off. The words replayed in my head. Finally useless. I don't know if I've ever felt so hollow. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked through my office, the one room in the house that was truly mine. Files, old photos, certificates, notes from projects long finished. I realized I had been holding on to a version of myself no one else seemed to see anymore. By dawn, I had made a decision. I cleared out my desk at the company later that morning, quietly and without fanfare. I packed my personal belongings into 2 boxes, loaded them into the car, and drove off. Not a word to Margaret. Not a call to Andrew. Nothing to Claire. 3 weeks later, I heard from an old co-worker that Margaret had posted online. "If anyone knows where he is, please tell him we just want him back." But that's not where the story ends. It's only where it begins. When I left that night, I thought maybe it was just the sting of the moment. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe I'd look back on it and laugh. But the thing about humiliation is that it doesn't fade, it festers. Every time I replayed the party in my mind, I noticed new details. The way Andrew leaned back in his chair, smirking like the joke was his crowning achievement. How Margaret had laughed harder once she realized everyone else was watching her reaction. The look on Claire's face when she glanced at me, then quickly away, like she was embarrassed for me, but too scared to say anything. In the days that followed, I tried to maintain some semblance of normal life. Margaret carried on like nothing had happened. She even made a few casual comments about how I had plenty of time now to run errands, fix things around the house, and help Andrew with his new venture. That last part stuck with me, Andrew's new venture. He'd been talking about it for months, some startup idea involving property investments that, to me, sounded half-baked. But everyone around him treated it like the second coming of sliced bread. "Dad, you've got the experience," he said one evening when he stopped by. "All those years managing budgets, logistics, you could really help me get this thing off the ground. I mean, you don't have anything else going on now, right?" He said it with a grin, sipping from one of my beers like he owned the place. Margaret chimed in, "It'd be good for you, Robert. You don't want to just sit around the house all day. This could give you purpose." Purpose. The word hit me harder than it should have. After 41 years of providing, raising kids, paying mortgages, and keeping this family afloat, they spoke as if I had been wandering aimlessly until Andrew came up with his big idea. I told them I needed time to think about it. Andrew just shrugged. "Well, don't take too long. Opportunities don't wait, old man." He laughed as if it were playful banter, but there was no mistaking the edge in his voice. The favoritism had always been there, subtle at first. When Andrew was younger, he was the golden child. His report cards, his sports trophies, his charm, everything he did was celebrated. When Claire got into college, I remember her showing Margaret her acceptance letter, beaming with pride. Margaret congratulated her, but then immediately turned to Andrew, asking about his plans for the weekend, dismissing Claire's news as if it were nothing. It wasn't that Claire wasn't loved, but she was always treated like a side character in Andrew's story. And now, as adults, the pattern was stronger than ever. Claire would call to check in, telling Margaret about her work, her travels, the people she'd met. Margaret would nod politely, but when Andrew walked into the room, the entire atmosphere shifted. Suddenly, she was all smiles, hanging on his every word. After the retirement party, Andrew began to treat me like his personal assistant. He'd call in the middle of the day, asking me to pick up supplies, look over his proposals, or even drive across town to meet one of his potential investors because I had the free time. Each time I said yes, I felt a piece of myself erode. I wasn't helping my son succeed. I was enabling his arrogance. One afternoon, Claire came over while Andrew was in the kitchen with Margaret. I was sitting in the living room, leafing through a folder of his so-called business plans. Claire sat beside me, her voice low. "Dad, you don't have to do this," she whispered. I looked at her, confused. "Do what?" "Run yourself ragged for him. He doesn't appreciate it. He never has." There was a sadness in her eyes, a quiet frustration that mirrored my own. Before I could respond, Andrew strutted into the room, clapping his hands together. "All right, team meeting time. Dad, you ready?" He tossed a stack of papers onto the table in front of me, barely glancing at Claire. "Sorry, sis, this might be a little over your head." Claire's face hardened, but she said nothing. She excused herself a few minutes later, muttering something about needing to leave. I watched her go, feeling torn. On one hand, she was right. I didn't have to do this. On the other hand, Margaret looked so proud every time Andrew asked for my help, as if his validation mattered more than my well-being. The weeks wore on, and the small slights turned sharper. Margaret began scheduling my days without asking, doctor's appointments for her, grocery trips, favors for Andrew. When I pushed back, she'd frown and say, "Robert, you're retired. What else do you have to do?" One night, Andrew brought over a few of his friends for drinks. They were younger, loud, full of bravado. At some point, the conversation turned to me. "You're lucky, man," one of them said to Andrew. "Having a dad who can bankroll your startup and still run errands for you? That's like hitting the jackpot." The group laughed. Andrew didn't correct them. He just raised his glass and said, "Yeah, Dad's finally useful for something." I felt the blood rush to my face, but I said nothing. Margaret sat beside me, sipping her wine as if the comment had never been made. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the bitterness deepened. I had become a joke to them. Not a father, not a husband, not a man who had given his life to provide. Just a tool to be used until I had nothing left to give. And yet, the worst was still to come. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary weekday that should have passed without a second thought. But I'll never forget it, because that was the day the ground gave way beneath me. I had been working through another one of Andrew's urgent requests. He'd asked me to review a contract he was planning to sign with a group of investors. To me, the numbers didn't make sense. The terms seemed predatory, and I told him as much. He brushed it off, laughing. "Dad, you're stuck in the old way of thinking. This is how real money gets made now." Still, he insisted I look it over, so I spent hours at the kitchen table highlighting clauses, jotting down notes. Margaret came in halfway through, setting a cup of coffee down beside me. "You worry too much," she said. "Andrew knows what he's doing. Just support him." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That afternoon, I decided to stop by the bank. I had always been cautious with finances, and I thought maybe if I spoke to someone, I could get a clearer picture. When I arrived, the clerk pulled up my account information, and my stomach dropped. There were withdrawals I didn't recognize, large ones, spaced out over the last several weeks. 10,000 here, 15 there, another 20 not long after the retirement party. My balance, which should have been more than enough to cover the next few years comfortably, was dangerously low. I asked the clerk for more details, and that's when the betrayal hit me square in the chest. The withdrawals weren't random. They were transfers, authorized under my name. But the recipient was unmistakable: Andrew. I felt the room tilt. My own son had been siphoning money from my account. I asked how that was even possible, and the clerk explained that Margaret had co-signed some of the transactions. She must have known. She had to have known. I stood there, dumbfounded, clutching the printout of my own disappearing life savings. That evening, I confronted Margaret. She was standing at the stove, stirring a pot of soup, as if nothing was wrong. "Margaret," I said, holding up the papers, my voice shaking, "what is this? How long has Andrew been taking money out of my account?" She didn't even flinch. She sighed, set the spoon down, and turned to face me with that same patient look she used to give the kids when they were being difficult. "Robert, it's not what you think. He's borrowing it. For the business. You'll get it back once he's successful." "Borrowing." My voice cracked. "This is our retirement. 41 years, Margaret. That money was for us. For our future. You let him drain it without even telling me." Her eyes hardened. "You're overreacting. Andrew has potential. He's building something. And if you can't see that, maybe you're the one holding him back." The words cut deeper than I thought possible. Holding him back. As if my entire life's work was nothing more than an obstacle to Andrew's ambition. Later that night, Andrew showed up, breezing through the front door like he owned the place. He didn't even wait for me to speak. "Dad, I know you saw the transfers. Relax. It's an investment. You should be thanking me. You're finally putting your money to good use instead of just letting it rot in the bank." I stared at him, my hands trembling. "You stole from me." He laughed. Actually laughed. "Stole? Come on. Family share. You've been sitting on that money forever, doing nothing. I'm just moving it to where it'll actually grow. Don't worry. You'll get your cut when this thing blows up." Something inside me cracked then. I looked at my son, not as the boy I raised, not as the man I hoped he'd become, but as a stranger who saw me as nothing more than a wallet with legs. And my wife, the woman who had once stood beside me through hard times, was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, siding with him. I realized in that moment that I wasn't just disrespected. I was betrayed, in the most intimate and deliberate way possible. The soup on the stove burned. The house smelled of smoke. And all I could think was, this was no longer my home. But that was only the beginning. After that night, the air in the house grew colder, heavier. It wasn't just the silence between us. It was the way Margaret and Andrew carried on as if nothing was wrong, as if I had simply imagined the betrayal. Andrew still came over almost daily, dropping his coat on the couch, raiding the fridge, spreading out his contracts on my dining table. Margaret cooked for him, praised him, nodded along to his stories about big deals on the horizon. Every now and then she'd toss me a look, almost daring me to bring it up again. I didn't. Inside, though, I was unraveling. For the first time in my adult life, I felt powerless. Money had always been my safeguard, my proof that all the sacrifices were worth it. Now, every time I looked at the printout from the bank, I saw years of overtime shifts, missed vacations, and sleepless nights evaporating into Andrew's fantasy. It wasn't just the money. It was the realization that I had no allies in my own home. The woman I married had chosen our son's ambition over our security. My son had chosen greed over respect. Sleep became impossible. I'd lie awake in the dark, listening to Margaret's steady breathing beside me, and wonder if she even felt a shred of guilt. In the mornings, I sat in my office, staring at the walls lined with certificates and photos, proof of a life that now felt meaningless. The faces in the photos looked younger, happier, unaware of what was to come. I tried to call Claire. She picked up on the second ring, her voice soft but tired. She lived 3 states away, and I hadn't told her the full story yet. "Dad, are you all right?" she asked. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to spill everything, to tell her how betrayed I felt, how Andrew was bleeding me dry. But I couldn't bring myself to burden her. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just wondering how you're doing." We talked about her job, her apartment, the small joys of her daily life. When I hung up, I sat there staring at the phone, the ache in my chest heavier than before. She was the one person who might have understood, and I couldn't even tell her. Meanwhile, Andrew's demands grew bolder. One afternoon, he dropped by with a folder in hand and a smug grin. "Dad, I need you to co-sign this," he said, sliding the papers across the table. "It's just a short-term loan. Low risk. You'll barely notice." I opened the folder and felt my stomach twist. It was a loan for nearly $50,000. My name was already typed on the line, waiting for my signature. "I'm not signing this," I said quietly. Andrew's smile faltered. "Dad, come on. This is how business works. You've got to take risks." "Not with my future," I replied, closing the folder. He stared at me, the grin gone now, replaced by something sharper. "You've already invested. Don't back out now." Margaret, who had been hovering nearby, spoke up. "Robert, don't be stubborn. This is for all of us. For the family." "For the family?" I snapped. "Or just for him?" The tension hung in the air. Andrew's jaw tightened. Margaret shook her head like I was being unreasonable. And for the first time, I didn't argue further. I simply got up, walked into my office, and shut the door. That became my habit, silence instead of confrontation. I stopped eating dinner with them when Andrew came over. I stopped answering his calls. When Margaret tried to rope me into his errands, I made excuses. On the surface, it looked like I was withdrawing, fading into the background. But beneath the quiet, I was taking notes. I gathered bank statements, copies of transfers, and contracts Andrew had left behind. I created a folder hidden deep in my filing cabinet, where Margaret would never think to look. Each document was proof, not just of the theft, but of the disrespect that had hollowed out my life. At night, when the house was still, I opened the folder and studied the pages under the soft glow of my desk lamp. My pulse would quicken, my mind racing. This wasn't just planning, it was survival. But the weight of it all pressed down on me. The house felt foreign, like I was squatting in someone else's home. Meals with Margaret were strained, our conversations clipped. Sometimes I'd catch her scrolling through her phone, smiling at Andrew's posts online. Photos of him at fancy restaurants, boasting about new deals in the works, all funded with the money he stole. I was living in my own shadow, stripped of dignity, trapped in a home where I no longer belonged. And yet, as much as it hurt, the silence gave me something I hadn't had before: clarity. I knew I couldn't stay in this place forever. I knew I couldn't keep playing the fool. Something had to change. And deep down, I had already begun to imagine how. The first real shift came quietly, almost unnoticeable at first. I stopped waiting for Margaret or Andrew to acknowledge me. I stopped trying to win back respect in a house where it no longer existed. Instead, I turned inward. At dawn, when Margaret was still asleep, I'd slip out of the house and drive. Sometimes to the library, sometimes to the park, sometimes just to nowhere in particular. At first, I thought I was simply running away from the heaviness of the house. But slowly, those hours became mine again. I started reading books on finance, on business, on psychology. I hadn't studied like that since I was in my 20s, and each page pulled me further out of the fog. I realized something Andrew would never admit. Experience mattered. I had 41 years of it. By chance, I ran into an old colleague, Martin, at the library. He'd retired a few years before me, but unlike me, he hadn't disappeared into the background. He'd been consulting for smaller companies, part-time, helping them streamline operations. Pays well enough to keep life interesting, he said with a grin. That night, I thought about our conversation for hours. Consulting. It wasn't something I had ever considered. I thought retirement was the end of usefulness. But what if it wasn't? I pulled out my laptop, the same one Andrew always mocked for being outdated, and started drafting a profile on a professional network. I listed my years of experience, the projects I'd overseen, the crises I'd managed. It felt strange, almost arrogant, to put it all into words, but when I hit publish, a small surge of pride filled me. Within a week, I had my first inquiry. A regional logistics firm wanted advice on restructuring their supply chain. It was small scale, but the moment I sat across the table from their managers, laying out solutions, I felt alive again. They listened, actually listened, like my words had value. They paid me for my time, too, more than Andrew ever promised in his so-called venture. That first check wasn't about the money. It was about proof. Proof that I wasn't finally useless. I didn't tell Margaret. Not at first. I didn't tell Andrew either. When they asked where I was going in the mornings, I just said I was keeping busy. They didn't press. Margaret was too absorbed in Andrew's world, and Andrew assumed I was sulking. But quietly, I built momentum. Word spread, one client led to another, and soon I was balancing multiple consulting gigs. My calendar filled up. My bank account, once bled dry, began to recover, not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily. Each deposit was another brick in the wall I was rebuilding around myself. With the work came something I hadn't felt in years: confidence. My back straightened, my voice grew firmer. I no longer hovered around the house waiting for scraps of respect. I had purpose again, but this time it wasn't for Margaret or Andrew. It was for me. Claire noticed first. One afternoon, I called her just to catch up. She said, "You sound different, Dad. Happier. Stronger." I smiled into the phone. Maybe I am. Meanwhile, Andrew was spiraling in the opposite direction. His venture wasn't taking off the way he bragged online. The flashy posts of dinners and parties grew less frequent, replaced by vague quotes about hustling and trusting the process. I knew what that meant. Money was drying up. He still had Margaret's blind loyalty, but cracks were showing. Sometimes I'd overhear her on the phone with him, her voice sharp, asking when he'd pay back what he borrowed. I stayed quiet, listening, filing it away. One evening, Andrew barged into the house, pacing like a storm. "Dad, I need more. The investors are pulling out unless I can cover the shortfall. This is make or break time." I looked at him calmly, something I couldn't have done months earlier. "I don't have anything for you." His jaw clenched. "Don't play games. You've got accounts. Assets. You can unlock something." I said no. My voice was steady, cold. Margaret rushed to his side, glaring at me. "Robert, stop being selfish. This is your son. Your blood. Don't you want him to succeed?" I didn't answer. I just turned and walked into my office, leaving them standing in the kitchen. For the first time, it didn't feel like retreat. It felt like control. Inside, I opened my hidden folder, now much thicker than before. Bank statements, contracts, proof of unauthorized transfers. Everything I'd need if the time came to expose them. My consulting work had sharpened me, reminded me of the precision required in documentation. Each page was a weapon waiting for its moment. And as I slid the latest document into place, I realized something important. I wasn't at rock bottom anymore. I was climbing. Quietly, steadily, out of the pit they had shoved me into. They thought I was fading. They thought I was beaten. They had no idea what was coming. It was almost poetic how the opportunity came to me, not through force or confrontation, but through the natural cracks forming in Andrew's empire of ego. By early autumn, my consulting work had blossomed. I had 3 steady clients and a handful of smaller ones. The money wasn't astronomical, but it was consistent, clean, and mine. Every invoice I sent, every payment I received, felt like a stitch mending the wound they had torn open. I started a new account, one Margaret didn't know about. Quiet deposits, a growing balance, untouchable. One morning, I got a call from Martin, the colleague who had nudged me into consulting. "Robert," he said, "there's a company downstate looking for a short-term interim director. Supply chain mess, leadership vacuum, the works. I told them about you. Interested?" I almost laughed. Me, back in a director's seat after retirement? But the more he explained, the more sense it made. It was temporary, high-paying, and, most importantly, powerful. A chance to step into a role where my experience wasn't just valued, it was needed. I accepted. Within 2 weeks, I was commuting twice a week, staying in a modest hotel paid for by the company, and running operations like I had never left. The staff respected me, the executives trusted me, and for the first time in years, I felt like myself again, not the finally useless man from the cake, but Robert, the fixer, the man people turned to when things mattered. Margaret noticed my absence, of course. She'd ask, "Where are you going all the time?" I'd smile and say, "Keeping busy." She didn't press. She was too focused on Andrew, who by now was drowning in his own failures. The signs were everywhere. His investors stopped showing up. His phone calls grew frantic, his voice sharper. I overheard one conversation where he barked at Margaret, "I just need another bridge loan. Dad's got to sign it." "He will, he always does." But this time I didn't. Then came the night I overheard the truth that set the stage for everything. Andrew was in the kitchen with Margaret, his voice low but urgent. I was in my office, door cracked just enough. "Mom, if Dad doesn't give me access, I'm sunk," he hissed. "The investors are threatening to sue. I've been moving money around to cover, but it's not enough. If anyone finds out, I'm done." My chest tightened. Moving money around. Investors threatening to sue. He wasn't just reckless, he was in deep, legally. Margaret whispered back, "I'll talk to him. He's being difficult, but he'll listen to me eventually. He always does." I closed my eyes, letting the words settle. For decades, I had been the one they leaned on, the one who fixed everything, the one who sacrificed. But now, they weren't leaning on me. They were trying to use me as a shield for Andrew's collapse. And that's when the plan began to crystallize. The folder in my office wasn't just evidence anymore, it was leverage. I had bank statements showing unauthorized transfers, contracts with my forged signature, proof that Margaret had co-signed withdrawals behind my back. Combined with Andrew's mounting legal troubles, it was enough to burn their house of cards to the ground. At the same time, my position at the company gave me new connections, lawyers, financial experts, people who understood how to navigate messy situations with precision. I didn't announce my intentions. I didn't rant or rave. I just started asking quiet questions, learning what would happen if evidence of financial misconduct came to light. The answers were clear. Andrew could be ruined. Margaret, too, if tied to his schemes. But I wasn't reckless. Revenge wasn't about striking blindly. It was about patience, about letting them dig their own grave while I built my escape. I began moving more of my assets into the new account, carefully, discreetly. I arranged for my consulting payments to flow there directly. I spoke to a lawyer about updating my will and revising account access. No more automatic rights for Margaret, no way for Andrew to reach in. Meanwhile, I played the part of the tired, retired man. Around them, I was quiet, withdrawn, even pliant. Margaret took my silence as submission. Andrew saw it as weakness. They didn't realize I was buying time. Then came the moment that sealed it. Claire called one evening, her voice soft but insistent. "Dad, I don't know what's going on, but I feel like you're hiding something. Are you all right?" For the first time, I didn't lie. I didn't tell her everything, but I said enough. "I'm finding my footing again, sweetheart. And when the time comes, I'll need you to trust me." There was a pause. Then she said, "I always have." It was the lifeline I needed. I wasn't alone anymore, not truly. And as I hung up the phone, I realized the pieces were finally in place. Andrew was cornered, Margaret was blind, and I was holding all the cards. They thought I was powerless. But in truth, I was standing at the threshold of something far greater. The chance to strike came faster than I expected. Andrew's world was crumbling, and desperation makes people reckless. It was a gray Thursday afternoon when he showed up at the house unannounced. He didn't knock. He never did anymore. He stormed straight into the living room, papers in hand, sweat beading on his forehead. Margaret trailed behind him, wringing her hands like a nervous accomplice. "Dad, this is it," Andrew said, slapping the papers down on the coffee table. "Final chance. If you don't sign this, everything collapses. The investors will sue. The whole venture goes down. We'll all be ruined." I looked at the papers calmly, my heart steady. It was another loan application, bigger this time, over 100,000. My name was pre-filled, my supposed consent implied. But what caught my eye wasn't the number. It was the fact that he had already forged my signature on one of the drafts. Sloppy, desperate, arrogant. "I'm not signing this," I said quietly. Andrew's face reddened. "Don't play games. This is for the family. For you. For Mom. For the future." Margaret's voice trembled as she chimed in. "Robert, please. He's right. If this fails, we lose everything. Think of the house, the reputation." I cut her off, my tone sharp but calm. "You already lost everything the moment you started stealing from me." The room froze. Andrew blinked. Margaret's mouth opened and closed like she couldn't find the words. I reached into the drawer of the side table and pulled out the folder I had been building for months. Neatly stacked, tabbed, organized, bank statements, transfer receipts, forged contracts, all laid out like an indictment. I set it on the table between us. "Do you see this?" I said, my voice steady. "Every dollar you took, every document you forged, every withdrawal Margaret co-signed. I've kept it all. Copies, notarized. Lawyers have seen it. If I file this, Andrew, your investors won't just sue you, they'll bury you. And Margaret, you'll go down with him." Margaret gasped, her face draining of color. Andrew's bravado faltered. He reached for the papers, but I placed my hand firmly on top. "No," I said. "You don't get to touch this." He stammered. "Dad, you wouldn't. You can't." I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "I would, and I can. But here's the difference between us. Andrew, I don't need to scream or brag to prove my power. I've already taken it back." For the first time, he looked small. The swagger melted away, replaced by the raw panic of a man who realized the safety net was gone. "I'll make it right," he muttered. "Just give me time." "You had time," I replied, "and you wasted it." Then, turning to Margaret, I said, "You stood by him. You signed off on my future without a second thought. And you laughed at me when he called me useless." I let the words hang in the air. "So here's what's going to happen. I'm done funding his failures. I'm done being mocked in my own home. From this moment forward, my accounts are locked, my assets moved, and neither of you will see a cent without going through me." Andrew's jaw tightened, fury flashing in his eyes. "You can't just cut us off." I smiled faintly. "Watch me." I stood, gathered the folder, and walked toward my office. Behind me, I could hear Margaret trying to calm him, her voice breaking, his voice rising in anger. But I didn't turn back. In my office, I locked the folder away. Not because I needed it right then, but because its very existence gave me control. Every shred of evidence was a leash around their necks. And they knew it. The days that followed were a storm. Andrew called, texted, even showed up at my office, demanding another chance, swearing he'd turn things around. Margaret pleaded with me at night, insisting I was being too harsh, that families should stick together. But I didn't bend. Instead, I kept working, kept building. My consulting business thrived. My savings grew. And the more they flailed, the stronger I felt. Revenge wasn't loud or flashy. It was quiet, deliberate, and devastating. By stripping away their access, I forced them to face the consequences of their own arrogance. And though they didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of their unraveling. Fallout came like a slow-moving storm. At first a drizzle, then a downpour, then the kind of thunder that shakes a house to its foundations. The first crack came when Andrew's investors finally snapped. With no fresh cash flowing in from me, his juggling act collapsed. One morning, I received an email from a lawyer representing one of those investors. They had come across my name on the forged documents, and they wanted clarification. I replied with 2 lines. "I did not sign these papers." Attached are notarized copies of my original documents proving unauthorized transfers. That was enough. Within weeks, Andrew was drowning in legal notices. His venture, once paraded online as the next big success story, became a cautionary tale whispered about in hushed tones. Lawsuits piled up. His so-called friends stopped answering his calls. The social media feeds that once displayed dinners, Rolexes, and champagne dried up completely. Margaret tried to shield him at first. She met with lawyers, sold her jewelry, even whispered about taking out a second mortgage. But when she discovered that I had already moved my share of the house into a trust with Claire as beneficiary, the realization hit her. She couldn't drag me down with them. For once, she had to face the wreckage she had enabled. The fights grew louder. I heard them through closed doors, Margaret begging, Andrew snapping, both of them pointing fingers. And I stayed silent, calm, The man they thought was powerless, now watching them unravel under the weight of their own choices. One evening, after yet another shouting match in the kitchen, Andrew stormed out. Tires screeched down the street. Margaret stood in the doorway, her shoulders slumped, her face pale. When she turned to me, her eyes were filled with something I hadn't seen in years. Not anger, not mockery, but fear. "Robert," she whispered, "what have we done?" I didn't answer. Claire flew in a week later. When she stepped into the house, she hugged me tight, no questions asked. She had known, somehow, that I was waiting for her, that everything I had built these last months was for a future where respect still existed. Together, we began the process of untangling what was left: lawyers, banks, accounts, all sorted with meticulous care. Andrew eventually declared bankruptcy. Margaret moved in with her sister, claiming she needed space to think. I let her go. For the first time in decades, I felt no obligation to chase after her, no weight pressing me to fix what they had broken. And me? I kept working, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. My consulting business flourished. My new account grew. For the first time, I wasn't living for anyone else's approval. Months later, I sat on the porch of a modest cabin I had rented by the lake. Claire was visiting for the weekend, sipping coffee beside me. The air was crisp, the water still. She looked at me and said softly, "You don't look useless to me, Dad. You look free." I smiled, the words settling into me like balm. "Finally free," I echoed. That was the real ending. Not the cake, not the party, not the betrayal. It was the moment I realized that revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about reclaiming the life they tried to steal from me and walking away while they crumbled under the weight of their own choices. And I did walk away. For good. Hey, this is my first time posting, and I'm not sure if I'll even get any replies, but I need to get this off my chest. This all happened a few years ago, but I still can't shake the feeling of betrayal. Maybe you all can help me understand if I was in the wrong, but I honestly think I'm owed a little justice for what went down. So, here's the setup. My name is Jess, and I come from a pretty normal family. Mom, Dad, and my younger brother, Alex. Like most families, we had our share of squabbles over the years, but nothing too serious. That is, until the whole issue with our late grandfather's house came up. Grandpa passed away when I was in my early 20s, and he left behind this small, but charming house. It wasn't anything special, certainly not a mansion, but it was cozy, had a good amount of space, and it felt like it could be home. The only problem was, no one was living there. Grandpa had been living alone in the house for years, and now that he was gone, it just sat there, empty and waiting for someone to take it. I didn't think much about it at first. It was just a house, right? But then, out of nowhere, Alex, my younger brother, announced he was moving into Grandpa's place. No biggie, I thought. He could use the space, and I wasn't exactly in a position to need it at the time. At that point, I was living with some friends, just trying to get by after a rough breakup. But as time passed, I realized I could really use a place of my own, somewhere quiet to regroup, get a little peace and space. So, I did what anyone would do. I asked my parents if I could stay at Grandpa's house for a while. I wasn't asking for a permanent spot, just a temporary place while I got my life back on track. I was already feeling a little awkward about it, because Alex had just moved in. But it's not like I was asking for his room. I'd be fine with the extra room or even the guest bedroom. I figured it wouldn't hurt to ask, right? I'll never forget the moment I brought it up to my parents. It was a Sunday afternoon, and we were all sitting in the living room. I was feeling a bit nervous because I knew Alex was already settled in there, but I figured my parents would see it as a reasonable request. "Hey, Mom, Dad," I started, my voice a little tentative. "I've been thinking, do you think I could stay at Grandpa's house for a little while? I could really use a place to crash until I get back on my feet. I'll help with anything, like taking care of the place or doing the lawn work." There was a pause. My mom looked at me for a second, but instead of the usual warmth in her expression, there was this almost flatness. It was hard to put my finger on at first, but something was off. My dad was sitting there too, half paying attention, his eyes glued to his phone as always. He didn't even look up when I spoke. Mom sighed, then looked at Dad, like she was waiting for him to say something. When he didn't, she finally spoke. "No, Jess, that's not going to work." I froze for a second. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's Alex's place now," she said, almost dismissively. "He's the one who's staying there. You need to figure something else out." I could feel my chest tighten. It was one thing to hear that from my brother, but coming from my mom? And Dad just sat there, staring at his phone, acting like I wasn't even talking. I didn't know what to say. My mouth went dry, and I tried to keep my cool. I don't need to stay forever, just for a little while. I'd be really careful, I promise. It's just temporary while I get back on track. My mom's face didn't soften. She crossed her arms, leaning back in her chair. No, Jess, it's not happening. But why? What's the big deal? I pressed, genuinely confused. This was family, right? I thought we were supposed to help each other out. My dad finally looked up from his phone. It's Alex's house now. You should be more independent. I blinked, feeling the sting of his words. It wasn't like I wasn't trying to be independent. I just needed a little help, a little space to breathe. But no, this was apparently where the line was drawn. But you let Alex stay there. Why not me? I asked, my voice a little sharper than I meant. My mom's gaze hardened, like I'd said something I shouldn't have. Alex needs it, Jess. He's been struggling with things, and we've already told you, you need to handle your own stuff. Don't ask for special treatment. The words felt like a slap in the face. Alex is struggling? I repeated, my voice shaky now. What about me? I've been struggling too. But apparently, I don't matter enough for a little help. The room went silent for a few moments, and I could feel the tension in the air. My parents didn't seem to care about the situation. They just sat there, as if I was being unreasonable. And Alex? Well, of course, when I mentioned it to him later, he laughed. You really think I'm going to let you move in here? He asked, snickering. No way, Jess. It's my place now. Figure it out. So, after that, I tried to put it out of my mind. It wasn't easy, but I had no choice. I couldn't just sit around begging for a place to stay. I had to make things work, so I moved into a tiny studio apartment that I could barely afford. It was cramped, but it was mine, and I didn't have to rely on anyone. But as much as I hated the situation, the bitterness stayed with me. Every time I saw my parents or Alex, I couldn't shake the feeling that they had abandoned me. I was the one who needed a hand up, not Alex, who had been living rent-free in a house he didn't even care about, acting like it was his personal palace. But they all kept defending him. He's in a rough spot, my mom would say whenever I brought it up. You'll figure it out, Jess. And Alex? Well, he wasn't shy about rubbing it in. He'd send me texts every now and then, bragging about how his life was so much easier with the house. He'd even throw in a comment here or there about how nice it was not to have to pay rent. It was like he knew how much it bothered me, and he loved it. He was playing some twisted game, and I was the punchline. Things dragged on like that for months. I got a second job, started hustling to cover rent, and tried to keep my head down. But it was hard not to feel like my parents had picked a side. I'd overhear them talking about Alex's bright future and how he was really getting his act together. Meanwhile, they'd give me these forced pep talks, telling me that I just needed to work harder. I guess they thought I'd get over it, but I didn't. I was tired of being the one they only remembered when they needed something. One evening, about a year after the whole "no, you can't stay at Grandpa's house" incident, I was out grabbing dinner when I got a call from my mom. I didn't even want to pick it up, but I did. Jess, honey, we need to talk, she said, her voice oddly serious. I felt a little jolt of anxiety. My parents had never called me this late unless something was up. What's going on? I asked, trying to sound calm. Well, we've been talking, and we have a situation, she said slowly, dragging out every word. We're in a bit of a financial bind, and we could really use your help. It's important. I sat up straighter. This sounded off. They'd never asked me for help before. Not like this. Okay, what kind of help are we talking about? I asked, already dreading the answer. Your dad and I need to borrow some money, she said, not even bothering to sugarcoat it. We've had some unexpected expenses come up, and we were hoping you could loan us a couple thousand, just until we can get things sorted. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mouth went dry. Here I was, struggling to make rent, still getting by on a shoestring budget, and they wanted me to give them money? The same people who had turned me away when I needed them? I was quiet for a moment, not sure what to say. You want me to give you money? I repeated, feeling the heat rise in my chest. After everything? After you told me to figure it out when I needed help? Now you want to borrow from me? There was an awkward silence on the other end of the line before my mom spoke again. Look, Jess, we're not asking for much, and we're family. We've helped you before, and now it's your turn to help us. The audacity. She really thought I'd just roll over and help them after everything that happened? I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. I wanted to tell her no. I wanted to hang up the phone and let them deal with their own mess, just like they had told me to do when I was struggling. But there was something inside me that snapped. Maybe it was the anger, or maybe it was just the sheer injustice of the situation. Actually, I said, my voice calm but sharp, I think I've helped enough already. What are you talking about? She asked, confused. I've been helping myself for the past year, I said, feeling a little more confident now. You made it clear that I wasn't worth helping. You told me to figure it out, so that's what I did. I didn't get a place to crash. I didn't get a handout. And now, you want me to bail you out. My mom's tone shifted from pleading to defensive. Jess, this is different. We're family. You should understand that. I do understand, I said, a bit of a bitter chuckle slipping out. I understand that when it was my turn, I was supposed to figure it out on my own. And now that it's your turn, you're coming to me. Well, I'm going to do the same thing you did. Figure it out. I could hear her sputtering, but I wasn't done yet. And as for the money, I think I'll be keeping it for myself, just in case I ever need to figure something out again. The silence on the other end was almost deafening. I could almost picture her speechless, not knowing what to say to that. And then, just before I hung up, I added one final line. Maybe you should have helped me when you had the chance. The silence lingered for what felt like an eternity before my mom finally spoke again, but this time, her voice had lost the pleading tone. It was colder, sharper. Well, fine. If you don't want to help, then we'll just have to figure it out ourselves. I heard the sound of her taking a breath, probably trying to compose herself. But don't think this is the last time we're going to ask. You're still family, Jess. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to feel guilty, but honestly, all I felt was a quiet sense of relief. I had finally stood up for myself. Yeah, well, good luck, I said before I ended the call, my hand shaking slightly as I put the phone down. That night, I didn't sleep much. It wasn't because I felt bad. I didn't. It was because I felt powerful. I had said no. I had taken control of the situation. For once, I wasn't the one on the receiving end of their expectations. For once, I made the rules. The next few days were tense, though. My mom and dad didn't call or text me, which felt weird. I was used to their constant check-ins or their passive-aggressive guilt trips. But now, nothing. It was like I had vanished from their radar, and it was exactly what I needed. I didn't want to deal with their drama anymore. Alex, on the other hand, wasn't as silent. He texted me the day after that conversation. Mom and Dad said you're being stubborn, he wrote. I don't get it. Why can't you just help them out like they helped you? I stared at the text for a while before responding, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Help them out? Like how? By letting them control me again? I don't think so. He replied almost immediately. Wow, Jess. I'm just saying. They've been there for you. You should be there for them now. I wanted to scream, to tell him exactly what I thought of him and his precious little house, but I held back. Instead, I just typed out something simple. Maybe if they'd been there for me when I needed it, I'd be more inclined to help. There was a pause before he answered again. You're being childish. And that was it. It didn't matter what he said, because I knew one thing. I wasn't going to fall for their manipulation anymore. It had taken me a while to realize it, but I was done. I was done being the one to bend over backward while they walked all over me. But the real twist? The real reason they were going to regret this? They weren't done with me yet. Oh, no. They still needed something. Something big. And when they came crawling back, I would be ready. A couple of weeks went by, and I settled into my routine. Work, gym, Netflix, sleep. It wasn't glamorous, but I felt more at peace than I had in months. The guilt they tried to make me feel had slowly faded away, replaced with a quiet satisfaction. I had taken control. I had done what was right for me. But just when I thought I was safe from their drama, the storm hit. One afternoon, as I was finishing up a shift at the cafe, I saw a notification pop up on my phone. It was a message from my dad. I hadn't heard from him directly in ages. It read, "We need to talk. Urgently." I felt a knot in my stomach, the familiar anxiety creeping back in. I stared at the message, trying to figure out what was going on. It had been so quiet for so long, I was beginning to think they'd just given up on me. I was about to reply when another message came through, this one from Alex. It's about Grandpa's house, he wrote. Dad's asking for your help. I stared at the message for a long time. Help with Grandpa's house? What the hell did that even mean? I could already feel my blood pressure rising. They couldn't possibly be serious. I decided to call my dad. It rang a few times before he picked up. Jess, he said, his voice strained. We need to talk about something important. Dad, what's going on? I asked, keeping my voice steady, though I could feel my heart thudding in my chest. Look, it's a long story, but we need you to come by the house. There's something you need to know. Something urgent about the property. I felt a sudden chill. What do you mean, urgent? We can't explain it all over the phone. You need to come in person. Why now? Why are you asking me for help again, after everything? I asked, my frustration creeping in. Please, Jess, he said, the desperation clear in his voice. Just come over. This is really important. I wanted to say no. I wanted to hang up the phone and tell them to figure it out themselves. But then I remembered the satisfaction of standing my ground before. Maybe, just maybe, this was the final test. And I was going to pass it with flying colors. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I just texted back. I'll be there in an hour. I pulled up to my parents' house, gripping the steering wheel tighter than I needed to. I knew something was off. The whole urgent thing didn't sit right with me. If it were really that important, they would have told me over the phone. But I was curious. Curious to see just how far they would go to manipulate me this time. As I stepped out of my car, I took a deep breath, bracing myself for whatever nonsense they were about to throw at me. I rang the doorbell, and after a few moments, my mom opened the door with a wide, overly enthusiastic smile. Oh, Jess, you actually came, she said, as if we hadn't just spent the last few months at odds. I narrowed my eyes. Yeah, you said it was urgent. She waved her hand dismissively. Come in, come in. We'll explain inside. I hesitated before stepping into the house. It smelled the same as always, vanilla candles and my dad's old cologne lingering in the air. It should have felt comforting, but instead, it made me uneasy, like I was stepping into a trap. I followed my mom into the living room, where my dad and Alex were already waiting. My dad was seated in his old recliner, arms crossed, looking annoyed. Alex sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone like he couldn't care less that I was there. I took a seat across from them. All right, I said, cutting straight to the point. What's so urgent? My dad cleared his throat. Well, first, we just wanted to see you, sweetheart. It's been too long. I let out a dry laugh. Right. Because you were so desperate to see me that you couldn't just say that on the phone. My mom shot my dad a look, and he sighed. Fine. We wanted to talk to you about Grandpa's house. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. What about it? My mom gave me that saccharine smile she always used when she was about to ask for something unreasonable. Well, we've been talking, and we realized that, maybe, we were a little unfair to you before. I blinked. A little. She ignored my sarcasm and continued. The thing is, Alex has been having a tough time keeping up with things at the house. There are property taxes, maintenance, and, well, he's just got so much on his plate. We thought that maybe you could step in and help. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. Help? Yes, my dad chimed in. We were thinking you could start pitching in financially, just to make sure everything is taken care of. I felt my jaw tighten. Let me get this straight. You told me I couldn't live there when I needed a place to stay, but now you want me to pay for it? For Alex's house. My brother finally looked up from his phone, rolling his eyes. It's not just for me, Jess. It's for the family. I let out a bitter laugh. Oh, now it's a family thing? That's funny, because when I needed help, I was told to figure it out. My mom sighed dramatically, like I was being the unreasonable one. Jess, don't be like this. We made decisions that we thought were best at the time. But now, we really do need your help. I shook my head, feeling my temper rise. No, you don't need my help. You need a scapegoat. You need someone to clean up the mess you made when you handed Grandpa's house to Alex without thinking it through. My dad leaned forward, his expression hardening. Don't talk like that. This is about doing what's right for the family. I stood up, my heart pounding. You mean doing what's right for Alex? Because let's be real, that's all this has ever been about. Alex scoffed. Oh, come on, Jess. Stop playing the victim. You act like we threw you out on the street. I turned to him, my voice cold. You did. Maybe not literally, but you sure as hell didn't care when I was struggling. You told me to figure it out. So guess what? Now it's your turn. My mom gasped. Jess, that is not how family treats each other. I laughed. Actually laughed. That's rich coming from you. Because when I needed my family, where were you? Oh, right. Too busy handing out free houses to my golden child brother. My dad's face was turning red. That's enough. I grabbed my bag. No, it's not. Because I'm done. I'm done playing this game where you guilt-trip me into being your backup plan. You made your choice when you told me I wasn't welcome. Well, Now I'm making mine. My mom looked genuinely panicked now. Jess, wait. I shook my head. No, you don't get to control me anymore. You don't get to cherry pick when I'm part of the family. I turned to Alex. You wanted the house? You got it. Good luck figuring it out. I turned on my heel and walked to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Jess, don't do this. My dad called after me. We need you. I stopped at the doorway, turning back just enough to meet his eyes. Yeah, I said. And I needed you. Funny how that works. And with that, I walked out. I drove away without looking back, but the second I was alone in my car, I felt a wave of emotions crash over me, anger, frustration, maybe even a little sadness. Not because I regretted what I said, but because it confirmed something I had always suspected. I was never really part of their plans unless they needed something from me. After that, I went full no contact. Blocked their numbers, ignored their emails, and made it clear through mutual relatives that I was done. And you know what? It was the best decision I ever made. No more last-minute guilt trips. No more feeling like I was some disposable backup plan. From what I've heard, Alex is still struggling with the house. Turns out, property taxes and upkeep aren't as easy as having everything handed to you on a silver platter. My parents apparently tried to spin the story to make me look like the villain, but people caught on fast. Some of my extended family actually reached out to tell me they understood why I walked away. Honestly, I have no regrets. They made their choice, and I made mine. So, what do you think? Was I too harsh? Or did they finally just get a taste of their own medicine?